You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast, and I'm joined today by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited for today's show, to be back here with you. How are you doing today?
Good. It's daylight savings week, and I am struggling. I feel like everyone is probably also struggling. That time change throws us all off. So, yeah, I'm here, right? I'm sitting here, hopefully. So that's I think the biggest feat that's come out of today.
Yes, no, I agree. When it gets dark out, when I'm like getting done with work, I'm sad. It's never fun. Yeah.
Yep. We're also excited to introduce today's podcast sponsor, who is a longtime partner of Phoenix Society. So without further ado, Rachel, could you introduce our podcast sponsor?
Yes. So today's podcast is powered by the National Fire Protection Association. NFPA is a nonprofit that seeks to save lives and reduce loss with information, knowledge, and passion. And you can learn more about fire safety and explore all their educational resources by visiting nfpa.org. And we're so excited to welcome on a special guest today. So Amber and I will be joined by Alexi Pyles, who is a child burn survivor. She was burned at 6 months old with second and third degree scald burns on her neck and chest. Alexi was abandoned by her parents shortly after the incident. So she stayed in an orphanage until the age of 2 when she was adopted by a single parent mother who brought her back to the United States. Alexi doesn't have any memories of her burns other than what she was told. She received extensive burn care from the ages of 3 to her teens. Due to the lack of immediate care, she did not have your typical burn treatment like skin grafts, expanders, or spending time in a hyperbaric chamber, but she did have steroid injections, pressure garments, stitching, and lasers. And now today, Alexi is a licensed professional clinical counselor and certified rehabilitation counselor with a specialty in DPT therapy modality and trauma-informed care. She has worked in many mental health settings, including residential, IOP, PHP, hospital, and low acuity outpatient. She currently works for Kaiser Permanente as a psychiatric social worker, focusing on their high acuity cases by connecting them to higher levels of care. And during her free time, Alexi likes to do stunts and acting, gymnastics, going on hikes, especially the beaches, and anything creative. So thank you so much, Alexi, for joining us today.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. It's been an honor.
Yes, and I need to get to more about the stunts because I have several questions about stunts.
Oh, yeah.
but I don't know what kind of stunts you're doing. I'm a little concerned, but I need to know more. But to get started, I know Rachel just gave us a brief overview of what happened. And I don't even think I was aware of kind of the story that you had. So if you don't mind, in your own words, we always like to have our survivors tell us a little bit about themselves. So let's start there, and then we'll get into stunts and all the fun things to hear soon.
Yeah. So I guess what would you like to know more about my story? Because I think it's pretty much the wrap up of what I know.
Do you know a little bit more about how you were burned? Like I know you said at 6 months old, you suffered this burn injury. Do you know a little bit more about what happened, or is that kind of a little bit of what you're not sure of more of that?
No, so it happened like in Xiamen, China. So way across the country, or way across the world. And once it happened, I was so young that I don't remember anything of it. And
Right.
after they left me, there was no note, nothing. And so just based on the inspection from the orphanage, they just kind of marked it down as 2nd and 3rd degree scald burns. And so my mom today thinks it might have been like hot porridge or hot tea, something that might have accidentally like slipped and kind of dribbled down my neck and chest. And so that's kind of what we've pieced together.
Yeah. And what was it like for you growing up? You know, you hear from survivors all the time, you know, we kind of get our story down pat, and yes, you have a story to tell, but what was that like for you kind of having, you know, question marks around your story and not necessarily feeling like confident telling exactly what happened?
Sure. No, that's a great question. There's been a really wonderful burn survivor, Michelle Anderson, and she and I really connected because she was also burned as a child. And so we don't have that cognitive memory to verbalize like, this is exactly what happened. And so a big part of what we kind of shared together was developing the story as we experienced it through the treatment care. And that is kind of where we really kind of capitalize or coin, like that's our narrative. And so the incident itself, I imagine, is probably like a moment, right? And it probably happened so fast that I'm like, is that even really part of the story, right? It's just a section, a paragraph, and more of what I think I truly cling to is what happened after. And so I do feel so connected to, I got adopted despite the incident. I got to meet really wonderful people. I got to get connected with Phoenix, right? I got to get to be a part of this community. And so the incident itself feels very marginal to me in regards to the bigger story.
Definitely. Well, I kind of...
Oh, sorry. As an adult, right, I'm sure you're continuing to navigate burns, and specifically right now that you're in the workforce. But I'm sure even just peers still like we are today, like asking you questions, right? So let's talk a little bit more about the education that you're doing as an adult and kind of explaining who you are now today.
Yeah, it's, I guess with peers, right, like other burn survivors, it's almost like that's cool, right? And like we just kind of like understand, we really don't have to talk too much about it. And that's something I try to reinforce too when I help support like the teen burn group with Children's Burn Foundation, where it's not necessarily about we have to constantly remind ourselves we're burn survivors, but learning how to integrate it in our everyday life. And so I think with my peers, it's that mutual understanding of like, we get it, right? When it comes to like my colleagues and working in the in environments where they're not burn survivors or maybe survivors of any, traumatic incidences, it is kind of debating of whether or not I do disclose. Sometimes disclosure leads to like questions and confusion that I'm like, it's fine. I don't need to talk about it. But in some cases where people are intrigued, I'll share like what's most important, I guess, of like, it happens, but it doesn't really impact my day-to-day.
Yeah, we had, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Jason Hurd. He was on the show maybe last season now at this point, Amber. And he talked about, he's obviously a surgeon now helping burn survivors, but him being a burn survivor himself and kind of that line where do you disclose, do you not disclose, the pros and cons of doing both.
Yeah, that's so cool though.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, and I know you're not a burn surgeon, but you are a licensed therapist, which we talked about at the beginning. So obviously you're helping others, whether they're burn survivors or, like you said, someone who has gone through a traumatic experience. So did your burns draw you to the world of becoming a therapist, or how did that impact kind of your career choice and what you're doing today?
Yeah, my burns definitely guided me to that direction of the helping profession, but I didn't know exactly what helping profession. I think growing up with my uncertainty of like what happened to me in China actually drew me to the police force, that I was kind of inspired by that Samaritan, which we never got to know his name or his role or position. But in my child like mind wondered like, yeah, maybe it was some officer that just found me and put me in the orphanage. And, you know, what a great person to make sure that despite not having a family, I was connected to something. And so when I was, let's see, how old was I? I think I might have graduated from undergrad trying out the police academy. But then when I went through the different steps, I realized I was maybe a little too soft for the police academy. They were like, you're too nice. You obviously need to be a little bit firmer, right? And so not having made that through, I think that my next step, maybe the universe was telling me like, well, I really was inspired by movement. Like as a kid, I always did gymnastics, I did swimming, track and field, right? Feeling like there's that word in there in mental health where it's like ableism, right? And there's that misconception that burn survivors can't move, right? And there's that feeling of proof of no, I can. And so a part of my healing journey was that confidence of no, I'm a very capable human being. And so physical therapy is what drew me after the police academy. But then as I went through it, I'm like, oh, but I don't like anatomy. I don't like physiology. The science behind all of the human body. And I had to take physics. I had to take all these different classes that were so hard. And my brain just like didn't really wrap around it fully that I could, sit comfortably in a, what is it? They don't do the MCATs, but they do, a very extensive exam that I felt really defeated. And so after I tried that, I went to my first World Burn Congress in 2016 in Rhode Island. And when I saw Cindy Rudder and James, I resonated with how they approached life. And I just knew from then I wanted to do what they were doing. And so I applied to go back to school in the counseling field, and then the rest was history. And I try to stay connected with providing therapy, learn that experience through, I think it was Jess and Doug, right, through the fellowship, right, like being exposed to those support groups. And from there, I just knew I had to finish that job, help do that next step, and maybe continue the legacy that James has provided for Phoenix Society.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
We miss James for sure. He was, I think, an instrumental part of several folks, right? Mine included. So we definitely miss him for sure. Lexi, I do want to take a moment and stop. I can imagine, right? And this is not just something like, right? I think there is a part of your story missing, and I'm sure that can be difficult, right? As well. Not everyone has the luxury of like understanding what happened in their story, right? And I think a lot of survivors, whether it's like not knowing what happened in the hospital because they were in a coma, or maybe it was just something where they like didn't understand, right? Like a piece of their journey. There is a piece of your journey that's essentially missing, right? And I'm sure that can be very difficult. And we hear that a lot, right? Even for the folks that have been in a coma, right? Like it's very difficult to not have it a part of a story. Yeah. So there is got to be that level of like, even if I don't know something about my own history or past, right? You can find that difficult. I sometimes go searching for answers. But so there's two parts to this question. One, do you find yourself searching, right? Look for the officer or for your past? But also how do you overcome, right? Like missing in both, that can be both from your own story, but also as a clinical, right, therapist. Yeah. Like how do you kind of overcome that?
Absolutely. So let's see, kind of drawing from my childhood, because I thought about that all the time as a kid, like especially in my teenage years, because I think as a kid, before you become a teen, right, life is just grand and dandy, and it's just kind of living with it. And once, I don't know if you've seen Inside Out 2, where they talk about like anxiety kicks in when you're a teenager. And I definitely felt that anxiety come up of like, maybe I would have been different if I hadn't had the burns. Maybe life would be easier if I hadn't had the burns, right? And it's just that constant loop of wondering, what would life be if I didn't have these burns? Because it kind of sucked, right? Like for me as a kid, and having to explain to other children, like, why I look different, or why I always had to wear turtlenecks, or, you know, whatever the case might have been. And so I think a big part of my teenage life was not having those answers. I didn't want to live, you know, like the hardships of just wondering, like, is it even worth it, right? Like that question of, did my parents actually want me to be alive or not? Was this intentional? Was this accidental? And that constant loop of thoughts. And so I actually had this as one of the articles, right, where it was like painting through that feeling, through that grief, with Phoenix Society. And honestly, that creativity is what helped me through a lot of this, because even though I couldn't get the answers, because we just don't know. And a lot of my high school friends even said, like, oh yeah, people actually go to China to hide, like to not actually have an identity. Like it's such a corrupt place where you could potentially, you know, be a missing person there. And so to have a percentage of even finding your family is so small that it's almost impossible. And so I imagine, or I'm trying to remember at the time, I'm sure I was like, well, that's not the case. Of course, I want to find my parents, right? They made like documentaries, they made movies, right? There's all these wonderful, like uplifting, heartwarming series, like TV shows that they've made where, you know, adoptee finds their parent, but that reality of like, I probably won't, right? And so even though that reality was hard to swallow at the time, I could make that reality through a story. And so as a teen, I wrote a lot of just random, I wouldn't even say like a novel, but kind of like a 2-page just story of imagining what life could have been, or where or picturing myself meeting my parents and screaming at them in their face, because, you know, how could you do that? But it was like, right, nice to just let it out and validate myself. Like, it's okay to feel these feelings, right? It's okay to be upset, because no one else, if someone told me it's okay to be upset, I would say, no, you know, don't do that, because you don't understand how I'm feeling. But that fact of that I could internalize and self-validate of, no, it is okay to feel that way, felt so empowering that that's where I found a lot of that relief. And then the art too, right? The painting, the drawing, movement is so helpful, because I could just allow to release that energy, something I definitely share with a lot of my clients, right, in the mental health field, even though they're like, but I'm not an athlete. I'm like, you don't need to be an athlete. You got to move your body, do something, right? You don't need to run a marathon, but just allow to kind of release that pent up energy.
Definitely.
For sure.
Well, and I know you talked a little bit about your arts and the creativity, and, you know, for survivors, you know, we always encourage folks to journal or paint or find some creative outlet. So whether that's from your own experience or even, you know, as a professional now helping others, I know survivors will turn to support groups or going to a therapist to kind of work through their journey and their feelings. Do you have advice for survivors who are maybe intimidated to go to therapy, intimidated to get started, or just kind of not even sure where to start? What kind of advice do you have for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would start with just the moment you feel ready, do it. Because I know as a kid, therapy was kind of forced upon me, where, you know, it's that fear of, oh my gosh, you need all the support, integrate yourself, right? Like have whatever tools you need. And because it was not within my will at the time, I don't think I was able to maximize the benefits. And so I get that a lot, where, you know, people come into therapy wishing, oh, I wish I did this all along, right? What was I so afraid of? And yada, yada, yada. And I said, well, actually, I think the fact that you chose, right, that intention, that agency to say, no, I'm ready now, is more effective than just jumping into something not feeling ready to, because I think especially with burn survivors, it comes with a major baggage of trauma, right? Of stress-related, trauma-related symptoms that may not even feel ready to unpack. And so to feel comfortable talking about that with a therapist is a really scary thing. And so absolutely, if one's not feeling ready, then don't do it. But know that when you are, I say dive in. I know they talk about therapist shopping. That's a thing. And, I think it is worth finding that person that can resonate and relate with you, because especially with trauma therapy, it's going to take some time. It's not going to be brief, where it is 4 to 6 sessions. It may take 6 to 8 months. And that's a good thing, because a big part of it is building that relationship of, can I trust this person with my scariest, deep, secretive parts of myself that I'm not willing to open up to other people, but know that this is part of the journey to healing. And so I think it's absolutely okay to feel scared, but just know that the moment, right, where you feel ready, dive on in. And I think Phoenix Society is a great place, because I know there's many of those support groups, right? You can get a kind of feel of, yeah, maybe this is for me right now, or maybe it isn't. And so I think just even trial and erroring is such a great start.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm obviously going to quickly plug Phoenix Society support group, but we also have chat and peer supporters. So even if you are just kind of interested in sitting in on a session, not a session, I guess that's not maybe the right word, but you know what I mean?
Right.
Sitting in and just even connecting with other burn survivors, sometimes that's even an incredible first step for folks.
Yeah.
I like that you talked about therapist shopping though too, because I feel like I've heard it a lot of like, oh, the therapist I'm going to doesn't work for me. Like, not every therapist is going to work for everyone, right? Like, I've been to my share of therapists I didn't enjoy in my right, and so I just had to go around until I found one that I liked. But I think like we just assume that we're going to be compatible with every therapist, just like kind of just like you don't always get along with the doctor, right? I've had to change doctors several times. So like, just like if you don't like your doctor, you don't vibe with them, then like I think it's okay to shop around. But it can be hard, right, to like emotionally prepare yourself for therapy and then to figure out like, okay, I got there and then it didn't blend, right? It's like a bad date in some ways. So I feel like I had this date, it didn't go well. Okay, I need to find another one. And you've already committed yourself to going, dating. So it's like a big deal. But I do think that's important, because like I think a lot of us maybe give up after like we've had that one bad date or one bad therapy session, right? But like continuing to try, I think, is really important. So I love that you said that. I do want to switch gears, because I still am very invested in this stunt introduction, and I need to know more. So I have seen your Instagram. I see that you do stunts. Now, are these like, do you just like doing stunts for fun? Are you doing them for like acting, right? Are you doing them for movies? I need to know more about this stunt part of your life.
Yeah, thanks. So it's right now, obviously the goal is to, make it into a feature film, but the beginning steps are just to keep training. And so a big part of that training is like going to fight choreography classes, martial arts classes, kind of understanding the actual technical side of martial arts. But yeah, so I'll do martial arts classes. So fight choreo and martial arts are very similar, but there's a lot of differences based on what the camera will read versus like actual technicality of this movement. And so learning the difference between that, learning how to fall. And so, with falling, you can actually hurt yourself, but with stunt falling, it's knowing how to do it without hurting yourself, but look real. And I definitely learned a good deal of that in gymnastics. And so I think I took to it naturally, because I'm used to kind of falling on my face, but, kind of chalking it up and be like, okay, I'm good. Let's go. Next one. Another part of stunts is doing wire work. And so if you ever watched the original Peter Pan with Kathy Rigby, right, she kind of swings in on wires and she does the cool floating, right? And so they've definitely used them more in a lot of these action movies, because you can get that really nice long time beautiful like movement in the air, and you're just like, this person shouldn't be floating for 10 seconds, but it kind of looks cool, right? And so a lot of that is what we call wire work, and just helping actors too and wires do things that they may not be able to do on the ground. And so it's understanding the air awareness and the body movement with wires. Let's see. Other stunts.
Are you based in LA? I have to ask.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
you are based in LA. Okay, I was like, because I feel like where else in the world would there be like stunt classes available for you to do? Because I feel like they're certainly not here in Florida. So I was like, where is she in the world that she is doing this? But it's funny. I watched. Have you watched Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin and Martin Short? Okay, have you watched this season? It's all about stuntmen. So I was like very invested in this because I've been watching this season. So for anybody that doesn't watch it, it's a great show, but it's all about stunts. And so I was like, I'm fascinated by the fact that there is like great classes around this, because like I said, it's not something that happens here. Just like, hey, I'm going to run the stunt class, but it sounds like fun. Did you watch the episode? And this is maybe a little controversial, right, for this, but and you know what I'm going to say, I think, where they set the stuntman on fire. Is that something that you've explored, interested in, no interest in? I would never want to do that, but I have to ask, right? It's like, that is a thing that stunt men and women do, like setting themselves on fire. Why or how, I'm not sure. But it was a very interesting episode where they set that gentleman on fire, and I was like, oh, a little triggering for me. And it's fascinating. You've not explored that.
No, that's a good thing that you brought that up, because that is the one thing I have a hard no to. I definitely wouldn't do it. I think there's a lot of, I guess, controversial opinions about it within the stunt field too.
Interesting,
right? Because like, as a burn survivor, it's like, well, absolutely no. Like, why would I ever do that? And we know that with burn tissue, it actually is much, it's more sensitive. It's easier to burn if you were ever to get burned again, right? Like, that's just why would I even, think twice or doubt that I would ever do it? But I guess, with non-burn survivors or people who have not experienced those kind of traumatic things, actually really take to it. And
like fire, right? Like, great, but more power to you, but it's so dangerous too. Like, and they go into it in depth in this episode. So if you are like triggered by that, but it was even interesting for me to learn, like, okay, when someone does that stunt, it's still very dangerous. Like, it is a very dangerous activity. So yeah, if you haven't watched that show, it is a really good show. I think, I did hear they've won some awards in terms of disabilities. Like, Only Murders in the Building is a really great, show too, that shares differences. Like, there's someone that's hearing impaired in the show, or was hearing impaired, so it's a really great show. But I also was very surprised at how much they focus on stunts. So to hear that today, I was like, oh, I need to know more.
I think in all things, right, things can be done tastefully, and I think the way they might have done it based on the script, right, it had to happen. And so I'm always appreciative. Can you do something, make it look tasteful, and not glamorize it or try to say that this is okay? And I think the things that really kind of bother me more so with fire stunts is the fact, like, I'll see people post about it and they're dancing in it, or they're like, oh, how cool, or I'm like a burnt toast, and I'm like, that doesn't seem like,
it wasn't glamorized. It was very tastefully done, but it was also still like terrifying of thinking, people do this for a living. Why would you? So when you said stunt, I was like, tell me that's not something you'd like to do, because I imagine it's difficult.
Well, it's funny you bring that. So my boyfriend also does stunts, but he got into a really serious car accident, and so a big part of his are car stunts, and so it's knowing our limits of. That makes sense. I wouldn't do the burn stunts. He wouldn't do the car stunts. And that's okay, right? I think there's so many different stunts out there that you can pick, right? Like, which one you want to specialize in, because it is kind of a talent, right? To feel comfortable being like, I know I can do this very well, make it look tasteful and realistic without glamorizing it or make it seem like this is a natural, casual thing. And
And
I
there's
think
still a level of danger to stunts
Yeah.
too,
Oh,
which I
absolutely.
didn't realize.
Yeah.
Like I always thought like stuntmen were just like throwing themselves off of buildings and like being fine, right? Like, oh, it's very good. No, it actually is. And again, that this episode or this season has like opened my eyes to stunts, right? Like, but
Yeah.
it's dangerous. Like they talk a lot about how dangerous it can be. So
Right.
yeah, I find it very interesting that, right, you've had that like not near death, but like scary trauma experience, and you're
Sure.
submitting yourself to some of the stunts are not for the lighthearted, I should say.
Yeah.
Definitely not. How did you first get into stunts? And what I was curious to know too with gymnastics, is that something that I know when I was a kid, because I was also burned when I was younger, I went to gymnastics as part of my like physical healing, like part of my PT was to do gymnastics. So I was just curious if that's how you got interested, or how did you end up doing stunts today?
Yeah. So my mom has a funny story that in the orphanage, I was just the most rambunctious kid. And she blames this one guy, one of the parents that went to go adopt another Chinese baby, would hold me upside down. And I would just be giggling and laughing. And so that feeling of being upside down, I think, never really scared me as a kid. And so since then, my mom had one of those old couches that had like the very straight up backing with like a beam that you can like walk across. And so I would always get up there and put a pile of pillows underneath me, just fling myself onto the floor as a kid. And my mom's
It sounds like my son is going to be a stunt man, is what you're telling me. So I'm a little terrified.
Well, so with that being said, my mom's like, I did not teach her this. I don't know where this came from whatsoever, but I know that if she's going to keep doing it, I might as well put her into gymnastics classes, because in gymnastics, you learn how to fall safely. And so she put me into the YMCA, and they just saw me kind of really advance quickly and like doing the different gymnastics tricks and things. And so she's like, oh, okay, well, I guess she's going to do it more competitively. And so I had done it for pretty much most of my childhood until I was 15, and then I switched over to swimming. But when I graduated from my undergrad, I kind of missed that feeling of like flying again, right? In gymnastics, it is being very airborne. It's learning to float pretty much without falling. And so just doing that again, I made a video and I posted on Facebook, and one of my swim coaches actually commented, and she said, oh my God, you should be a stunt person. I know stunt people. Message me and I can connect you with them. And so I was like, stunts? What are stunts? Okay, I guess. Sure. And so when I messaged her, she's like, here, come to this bar. We'll connect, and I'll get you hooked up with my group of friends. And so oddly enough, it was a UFC fight, which I don't like fighting because, again, of that, like, right, the gore, the violence, we're instilling violence.
Stunts,
and people
though,
are getting,
right?
Yeah, but they're stunts.
Yeah.
Glorified stunts. People are getting paid millions of dollars in bets and whatnot. But the idea was, when I was there, people watch UFC fights because it is martial arts in action, right? Learning like, oh, if I do, this is very martial arts wording, but it's like if I do a cross, a hook, right, to a this, to a that, right, I know that might sell, that might land, and building kind of choreography for TV stunts versus like the real UFC stunts. But getting there, I got to connect with people, and they're like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, I don't know. I just graduated and I have no future in front of me. So I'm just here kind of figuring out like if the stunt thing might help or work out. And it kind of just took off from there. And I got to train at different gymnasiums in the LA area, connect with other people who could recommend me to do different stunts. And so I was, if you ever watched that reality show Ultimate Tag, it's kind of like parkour tag. I got to help do a lot of that background testing for that show. I was on a Google game show, if you want to look it up. It's what is it? Odd Man Out, or well, they don't use man anymore because they're trying to use more like you're 6 cheerleaders and one mole and I was the mole. Well, I gave that away, but
Spoiler
and just other little things.
That's awesome.
No, that's so fun. I was just thinking, I was like, my hobbies sound so boring. I need to find something
It's a
better.
stunt, right? I'm like, I can't say I want to do stunts, but it sounds very exciting. It's ironic. So I also just finished, I know we're getting off like here, but I also just finished a WWE documentary, Mr. McMahon. If you haven't had a chance, I highly recommend. But I don't like WWE. I'm not into wrestling in any way, shape, or form. But in this documentary, they talk a lot about how dangerous WWE is, even though it's like everyone says it's fake. It's not, it's still dangerous, right? There's still a level of like, even if you're not hitting that person, like they're falling to the ground. Like there are levels of danger associated with even wrestling. So it does, like I said, between that and the Only Murders in the Building show, like there is still a level of danger associated with like acting out stunts or like action scenes and whatnot. So until it all just happened recently, I have like so much more respect for wrestling, but also just like stunts in general, because we've been watching all of these different shows that have like highlighted what it's like to like act out stunts and things of this nature. So two of my like most recent watches, and now I have like more respect for folks that do that kind of arts, because I do think that it does require a lot of physical activity. So as a survivor, like that is very interesting that you're into that, because I think that is like, right, there's a level of like you could get injured again, right? And so that is something that you have to, I practice like heightened safety, right? My husband always says that I'm like the dangerous one in the relationship also, but you have that like heightened awareness of safety, I think, associated with like, because you've had an injury before.
Right.
Well,
that's so fun.
Yes. Well, let's get back to, I want to talk a little bit more about, you're also a licensed therapist. So, do you spend a lot of time counseling survivors? Do you have all folks, of all walks of life? Do you prefer a specific specialty? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So through my licensure program, it was really hard to find hours. And so once you graduate from master's program in counseling, you have to like apply with BBS and get your associate number. And so within getting your associate's number, you're not fully licensed. You have to gain 3,000 hours. And so that's a lot of hours to just volunteer. So it's finding a place that would allow for associates. And so throughout that journey, I worked with the homeless population for a period of time. And to some extent, it was really like rewarding, because I was working a lot with trauma survivors, not necessarily burn survivors, but people, experiencing domestic violence or abuse in the home, experiencing homelessness itself, right? Not being able to afford a house and trying to live on the streets. And I think I definitely got a greater understanding of why that cycle happens, right? Of like, it's so hard to live on the streets that it kind of prompts one to use, right? To kind of learn how to cope with it. And so definitely could empathize or understand more of like why the cycle continues to happen. But then from there, I went to an IOP and PHP program, understanding DBT, using DBT, which is Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. That's become more of the golden standard in treatment today. I know there's a lot of like really funny TikToks of like, you should have DBT in your life. And they'll use little like, there's like little terms that are specific to DBT. And so it's like, what would your wise mind say, if you want to look that up later? But like, right, it's a really great modality. It's structured. It draws upon other different techniques. And so getting that experience to learn DBT and working with people with personality disorders, again, was another like really wonderful experience to have, because I got to see trauma result in these personalities, right? Like even as a kid, we might have experienced something stressful. Not addressing those stresses kind of turn into, the people we are today. And So a big part of that therapy was not necessarily fixing, because I don't think of myself as a fixer, right? I think doctors do that, right? They fix broken bones, but people themselves are not broken. And so through that experience helped me learn a lot of patience. I think in grad school, they always talk about like, oh yeah, you have all these tools, you're going to help people understand their problems and fix them. But that's really not even the case, or at least from what I see it. A lot of the trauma aspect is really finding patience and empathy with, what happened, but how can we learn to work through it, right? Rather than change or fix it, because we can't, essentially. And so having that experience with that population, trying to earn those hours, then led me to Kaiser, which we're technically called generalists. So we work with all ages, all diagnoses. So I've had patients who are 4 years old up to in their 90s and everyone in between. But my ultimate goal really is actually to work with the burn community. I did a lot of I did some sessions in my not undergrad, but during my practicum under the supervision of James. And it was just so fun to actually work with people who also understood where I came from. I think there's that big question I think we talked about earlier of like, do I disclose? Do I not disclose? And to fellow burn survivors, I feel so confident to say, I'm a burn survivor with you, right? Like we're in this together. I get it. And that's just nice to have that mutual understanding versus having someone come in with something else and debating whether or not I share it, because sometimes it isn't well received and there's more backlash or pushback than actual helpfulness. And so I think a big part of that helps me know, or kind of solidified like, yeah, and I think the burn community is where I want to be. But in my experience of trying to get my license, I had to, get it from other avenues, which I wouldn't change for the world either, because I think it has also helped me patience when I come back to the burn community and providing therapy there.
For sure.
Now, tell me. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say. I mean, like the burn survivor community, we say this all the time. Like, you don't know about us until you're a part of us, and then you realize how big we are. So I can imagine too for you. Like, obviously, you want to help other burn survivors, but sometimes it can be difficult because sometimes it feels like there's not a lot of us out there. But yeah, I know there are, but it's not as, I guess, mainstream as some other communities.
Now, I want to know more about DBT. Now, can you give me an example of like what that is versus another type of therapy?
Yeah. So dialectical behavioral therapy talks about the dualities of life, right? And so it's coined by and patented by good old Marsha Linehan, and she's a very kooky lady, but we love her. She created this therapy treatment because she grew up in a time where everything was based on the medical model, right? Some kind of issue happens. Oh my God, give her drugs, isolate them, right? And it's like, what is that going to do, right? It's not that she has a broken bone or something's not broken. Like drugs aren't going to fix, what she was experiencing. And so she felt that there needed to be a change of like, we can't just always use drugs. We can't use isolation. We can't use the techniques they used way back in the, mid 1900s, right? We're in the 24th or 21st century. Like, come on, America, let's wake up. And so her modality touches on the dualities of life, like I said, and she drew a lot of like Buddhist culture or Buddhist ideals, and it talks about that harmony, right? Because we know that America is the youngest, right? The youngest nation. And so there's much more that we need to learn. And so she studied Buddhism, and mindfulness is so key to that first step of understanding how we learn to fix things in our lives, right? Things that aren't working. The key difference I think of in DBT versus any other modality is that duality piece of when one is feeling stuck in depression, right? Or one is stuck in anxiety. In cognitive behavioral therapy, you would say, well, just think differently, right? Because your thoughts are how you feel, and how you feel is how you behave. So if you have a negative thought, just change the thought. Or in acceptance and commitment therapy, it's like, oh, you have a negative thought. Well, you just got to accept the fact you have a negative thought. Right. And some people are like, okay, I accepted it, but I feel that kind of echo. Okay. And so there's that feeling of like, I should feel differently, right? If I just accept it or if I change it. And so there's this question of like, I don't know how effective this is if I don't really see any change. And so with Marsha Linehan, it's more of that perspective of, I think there's a part of you that feels this, and that's okay. But I want you to imagine if there's another part that can also exist where you do feel different, right? And so let's say with anxiety, it's like, okay, I feel very anxious, but I can also be confident about this as well, right? Like I am a good person, but I can also be doing better, right? And there's, I think in life, right, we always put things in boxes, that black and white thinking. And her idea is really to open that up of it can be both, right? Why do we have to choose? And so that just that first step of recognizing there is a choice that can be really empowering of, oh, I don't always have to be this way, right? There is a possibility that these two things can coincide, which then goes to that next step of she has a gigantic book. I think it nearly has like 500 some pages or something of just different tools, one right after another, to build what she calls her toolkit. And when you're experiencing, right, that kind of fork in the road, you can recognize, okay, is this as a result of lack of mindfulness, right? Am I just rolling through the motions? So I can then practice mindlessness, which then I can practice mindfulness. Am I noticing a lot of this is a difficulty with understanding my emotions? And so she says, okay, well, I have a section for that too. This is called emotion regulation. Or is this a challenge based on having tolerance to any stress, right? The moment I see a trigger, I'm instantly anxious, right? Maybe that's the stress tolerance. And so she has a whole section for that as well. And then her last one is, well, maybe I have a hard time understanding how to communicate this to other people. Well, she has a section for that too. It's called interpersonal effectiveness. And so through these different branches, it creates such a structured and directional way of therapy that it gives the person that choice, that idea of like, I do have agency. I can learn to work through this. Whereas, right, other modalities just say, well, just change it, just fix it, or just accept what it is.
I love that.
I was going to say the same. I can be very anxious at times, but I liked what the example you gave earlier. You can be anxious and confident.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I know we're almost here on time. So before we do, I know, Rachel, we had a question here, and I think this is really important, and I'd love to hear your answer to it before we enter our final questions. Can you talk more about what it means to be healed from therapy? Or do you think that anyone is really ever healed, right? Like, I'm a firm believer of like, I think everyone continues to need, right, some sort of therapy in their lives. Do you feel that healing is a thing, or do you think like gaining that toolbox will help you with your therapy?
No, absolutely. Oh, I feel like that's such a big subjective word, right? Because like, what does it mean to be healed?
Right.
And I think every day something changes, right? Even, and I think beforehand, right, like talking about the questions we would be going over, and I was thinking about it. Something that stood out to me is like looking at the changes on my scars, right? I have, let's see, I'm trying to do the math. I have almost 30-year-old scars. And now I'm like, is that a mole? Has that always been there? Right? Or like, has that keloid always been that thick? Right? And it's just always wondering, like imagining what is changing, right? And so I think, again, the one thing I like to coin from DBT, they say change is constant, right? The only thing that's constant is change. And so that idea of like, are we always completely healed? Well, I think there's always going to be something that's going to change, and learning to work and move with it. Yeah. And so absolutely, like you said, it's knowing that I have that toolkit, right beside me for those moments, because something's going to happen. That's inevitable, but it's knowing, can I be prepared for it? And sometimes we're not always, but knowing that I have that. It's funny. Yesterday, I actually went out and got a book that's a fun book. I'm always buying like those self-help just as like research materials of like what are people reading out there. But I just got myself just a nice little fictional thriller book. And I was like, this is so nice to not have to always think about, bettering my mental health, right?
Yeah.
Right. I don't have to better my health or myself all the time, right? I can actually do it by enjoying something that's fun and not always so focused in that change or of what I can do different.
I love that. Well, Lexi, it has been an absolute pleasure to learn all about all of the things, stunts and therapy. Who would have thought, right? That's where we'd be right now. But we always ask our guests 2 final questions. So my first question for you is, what is one thing you want the world to know about being a burn survivor? And I just, before you answer this, want to thank you for sharing your story, because it does have, right, those complexities. And I think it's a little bit difficult to talk about at times, right? Not knowing the whole story. So I appreciate what you've shared with us today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah. What is one thing you want the world to know about being a burn survivor, right? From your own words. So you're a child burn survivor. What's one thing that maybe you think the world needs to know?
Yeah. See, that's a good question. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is we are capable, right? I think just that they thought of, and I've seen this happen a lot as kids and even adult burn survivors of, oh my gosh, I'm different now. I can't do anything that I used to do, right? This is going to stop me. I'm never going to have these opportunities. And I think that is just so far from the truth, right? That it's just one part of our life. And that if we put our mind to doing whatever we want to do, you can accomplish it. And so we're more than fully capable.
It's a great thing the world should definitely know about all of us burn survivors.
Coming from our burn survivor stunt woman herself, right? You are capable of doing anything.
Yeah,
so
it's a true definition. Well, with all that said, it is time for our final question, which is our Phoenix Partner question, today sponsored by NFPA, an organization devoted to eliminating death, injury, property, and economic loss due to fire, electrical, and related hazards. So their question is, what is one word you would use to describe the burn survivor community?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. One word. I think the word that comes to my mind is connection.
Yeah, I love that too.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Well, Alexi, it has been an absolute pleasure getting to meet you. I've had a great conversation today, as I know Rachel has as well. Any final thoughts you want to share with us before we close out today?
Not that I can think of. It's just been wonderful being here, and I'm happy to share my story. And so thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
You have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening.